Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm here today with Max Rex. He is a cartoonist and illustrator from Montreal whose bi-monthly series Big Baby is published by King Comics, and volume 1 has just concluded with issue number 13. Hey Max, how's it going? Thanks for joining me today.
Hey man, it's going great, and thank you for inviting me. Appreciate it.
I'm excited to talk to you about comics, and you and I kind of met each other through mutual friends in the local music scene, and I only later discovered that you were a comic book artist, which I find really cool. So why don't you start by just telling me how you got into that and like what led you to the realm of comics and becoming a comic artist?
So do you want me to go really deep, like childhood stuff, or
Sure, you
I
can
can start
start
with
that
that?
far back.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
sure.
Like how you get into that stuff, right?
Hmm.
Um, my earliest memories of comics is kind of twofold. So I'm French Canadian. So there was kind of a mix, and my dad was in the army, so we lived all over Canada and Ontario, Quebec. So there was always kind of a mix of American comics and European comics when I was a kid. So my sister would get she's a bit older than I am. She would get the American comics and I would see those. And on the other side, my parents would buy me more, I guess, generally kid-friendly comics on the European side. So Tintin, Asterix and Obelix and stuff like that. So that's kind of how it started. And drawing just was kind of natural from a very young age. Uh, so probably from the point on, from like 2 or 3, I still have some of those old drawings here. Um, and I've been drawing ever since. The earliest drawing I can remember is from like cartoons and stuff, Transformers, He-Man, all the stuff we were probably all into when we were kids.
Cool. And you have a background as a visual arts teacher, right? Am I correct?
Yeah, that's basically what I studied in university, visual arts, um, and then did an extra back for teaching.
Cool. So from teaching to how long have you been doing the comic book stuff full time now?
Well, I'm on work leave right now, so basically from that point on, um, basically, I mean, you know the story, I'm sure. I was in an altercation with a student at school. I was stabbed. So basically, I've been doing it full time at home as kind of what used to be a hobby has kind of become like full time stuff.
So okay, so I don't know how much you're comfortable sharing about that, but I think that's a really interesting thing because obviously a very traumatic incident that you've turned into kind of a career change and something I would imagine positive in your life. So like what can you tell me about that?
Well, it's definitely, when you find yourself not working anymore, I think people who don't already have other things going on, like I don't really see how it works out for them or how it could work out. I just the comics I'd already started. The real impetus was just kind of like within the first few weeks, months of the pandemic. That's actually where it started. I've been drawing for years and I did comics when I was a teenager, all through probably university and stuff till I was like 22, 23, and then it kind of fell off a bit. What was great as a visual arts teacher is, I'd be still drawing, kind of keeping up the chops pretty much every day because, I was one of those teachers who could actually show you kind of what I was talking about when it came down to, the basic academic stuff where it's anatomy and perspective you got to learn for figurative art. So drawing bodies, drawing environments. So I was, and I mean, that's all you do when you draw comic books, right? So
Mhm.
um, the chops stayed up all through kind of teaching it. And then pandemic hit and we had a lot of time off as teachers at first. So I was like, I'm just not the kind of person to sit around not do anything. And it was kind of a good time in my life for like, you know, I got to pick up some good habits before I get too old and I don't, work it into my daily routine. And I was like, I've wanted to do comics forever. This is like the best opportunity to start something. And if I don't, I'd feel pretty crappy about myself. So that was the impetus. And it started kind of part time, obviously. Well, full time, we'll say, first few weeks, months of the pandemic. Then we were working part time. So I was working on that as much. You basically find time where you can to work on it, right?
Mhm.
And then, yeah, the incident happened. It's a little over 2 years ago. Um, where basically a student walked up to me and stabbed me twice, once in the shoulder and once in the heart, basically.
Oh my
Um,
God.
yeah, so I was very lucky to survive. He missed a vein by about a millimeter, which if that had been cut, I would have bled out for sure. And from that point on, obviously I've been on work leave, so that's allowed me to work full time on it, which is, I'm not complaining. It's great that I can put the time in.
Yeah, I mean, I guess not directly related to the comics thing, but I just want to because I've heard about the story from
Sure.
from people, but I have never spoken to you about it. What was the recovery like, and what was going through your mind as you were in hospital and just like getting through it?
Sure. Listen, what happened is, again, I was extremely lucky. So the actual stabbing itself, because I was, so close and yet, I didn't bleed out. What actually happened is it was like a skin or a membrane around your heart that was filling up with the blood, right? And it was applying pressure to the heart. So they had to basically section, they call it sternotomy, where they cut you open.
Hmm.
And then they stitched up the heart and sewed me back. And obviously the sternum is held with metal rings, basically. So the hardest part of recovery was, in a weird way, not the actual stabbings, but the sternotomy was the big thing, right? Because after that, sneezing, your body literally, anytime you feel a sneeze coming, your body just shuts it down. It's really weird because it would just be too painful,
Oh,
coughing and things like that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. They
oh,
give
so
you a
you
pill. They give you a pillow to hold, like if you have to cough or something. And yeah,
that's crazy. So you're literally incapable of sneezing. Your body wouldn't let you do that because it knew that it
it
would.
was like, yeah, it was just like I would feel the sneeze coming, and obviously the brain would be like, oh no, and it would just no sneezing would happen. It would just like it's a weird feeling, yeah.
Wow.
Because usually a sneeze, I mean, it's something I think that you're supposed to let out. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'd assume it happens for a reason.
yeah, absolutely, right. You're fighting something off or whatever it is. Yeah, so stuff like that. I mean, getting out of bed for the first few days and weeks was like pretty horrible. Uh, because like I'm on the left side of the bed, I kept getting out, and obviously my girlfriend would help me for the first few weeks, but I would keep getting up on my right kind of elbow and pushing up. And I did that for about a month and a half because you have to sleep on your back. You can't sleep on your sides and move around and
Mhm.
stuff. So I did that for a little over a month and a half. And so that messed up my shoulder, super, like in a weird way, because I was just always using the same side to get up off the couch, things like that. So I had to do a bit of physio for the right shoulder, which like, you know, you would think is not in any way connected to what happened to me, but those were the consequences after. It's fine now. But it took a few months of physio. There's some weird stuff. At one point, maybe about 3 weeks in, I would wake up at like 1 or 2 in the morning, and every time I would basically breathe in, it felt like someone was punching me in the ribs, and I would literally like yell out and stuff. So my girlfriend would get up with me. I'd have to walk around. There was like this one kind of position when I would sit down where it felt a little better, but it was just I had to let it kind of finish up. Basically, it
Mhm.
would happen. It happened for about a month, I would say. Yeah,
And now, 2 years after the incident, are you fully recovered?
pretty much. I would say it's just occasionally I just get like weird stuff that is related to it. Every once in a while, a couple of times a week, I'll get that punch in the ribs, just the one, where I'm just sitting there watching TV or a video or something, and it's just like, oh no, like I'll feel it in my ribs. I don't. It. I mean, it's got to be nerves or something. I don't know exactly. I'm not an expert. And like where I got stabbed here, occasionally, like last night, it happened where it just kind of feels a little numb, a little odd. But other than that, there's nothing like physically incapacitating.
So, after having, well, literally a near-death experience like that, did that affect your outlook on your career and influence your intentions with the comic book stuff? Because, you know, obviously, when you go through something like that, it's like the realization life is short. You're like, I could have not been here now, so I might as well be doing what I love. Is that kind of the type of thing that you went through?
I would say that's definitely it. Not that, before this incident that I wasn't very motivated and fairly disciplined in doing it. But obviously this just reinforces that 100-fold. You know what I mean? I was generally a fairly impatient person. I'm probably a lot more impatient now. I just, anyone or anything that wastes my time just really irritates me. I was a little bit like that before, but now, like I said, it's very heightened. So the thing with the comic book project, this as well. You're in a band and you've worked with other people.
Mhm.
for you guys, it seems to be going well. You guys have been the same kind of, solid core trio for like how long now? Is it
Over
a
10
decade? Like,
years.
yeah,
Yeah, it's been like it's gonna be
so
11 years with Gopal. I was with Brandon for a couple years prior to that, but yeah, it's over a decade now, the three of us.
that like that's a pretty rare thing. Not to say that there probably have been arguments and stuff like that, that those things happen, but like that's a rare thing when you work with other people and in bands, especially, members tend to change and stuff. And for myself in bands, I got kind of irritated with that. I was generally the band leader and having to coordinate all that, and it's a lot. Uh, Comics was also something that like I could just rely on myself. I don't need to rely on anyone else to do it. I knew I could figure out a way to self-publish it, on start on a small scale. And again, that aspect of just, all the time I put in is not wasted. Sometimes you put time into a band and it falls apart, and you're like, well, that was a lot of hard work and time put into something that didn't bear fruit. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
another aspect of it.
I
Not that
try
I'm against playing in bands and stuff.
Absolutely. I try not to look at it that way. I don't believe that anything is truly a waste of time if you can take away something from it personally. Like even a lot of
Sure.
hard work that doesn't bear any fruit, there's inevitably something that you take away from it that changes you or improves you as a person. So I kind of try to think of things in that sense.
I'm sure. Yeah, no, not that I don't think that. It's just certain, overall, I'm very happy and I've learned great things no matter what the project, but there have been just certain instances, I guess, that irked me. I'll put it that way, you
Yeah,
know?
and I definitely appreciate the fact that it's easier to be working on something solo and only have to rely on yourself and nobody else. There's definitely benefits to that. But comics, many comics, especially the bigger ones, are a team effort, but you're doing everything on your own. So I was hoping you could walk me through the process. What does it take from to go from start to finish? Like how does your process work when making a comic issue?
It starts with like in the comics lingo, we start with thumbnails, which is basically, maybe a 2 inch by 3 inch, box that represents your page, and you draw it at a very small scale. Not that everyone has a different process, but this generally a lot of cartoonists and illustrators will do this, right? Especially for comics. And what that allows you to do is basically see if the basic composition of your pages is clear and understandable, because obviously that's one of the most important things is, anyone reading a comic has to be able to flow and kind of read it in a natural way where they're not like wondering, well, is this guy talking first or second, or the word bubbles are in weird positions. It's like you have to think of all these things, so you kind of figure it out at a small scale, and because it's small, it doesn't take lots of time, and you can fix it and erase and do it over. um, Once I'm done those thumbnails, I will blow them up, and I'm a big proponent of the light table, which is basically a table that reflects light up. um, and that generally most of the papers you work on will create that effect of translucency once you put a sheet on top of something or a drawing where you'll see through it, right? And the reason I do that is once I have those thumbnails blown up, I'll put a sheet of paper down on top of the light table, do what's called, I guess, the basic penciling, right, of the actual uh, panels and the word balloon placements. I'm very instinctive, so I tend to draw the story and put the images down that I kind of see in sequence, and throw in word balloons that I think are just about the size of or the amount of text that I want to put in there. And then I'll come back and write the script. Um, and that's usually at the penciling stage. That way, if you do have to blow up, you realize you have a lot of script for one balloon, you can make it bigger or you can split it in two. You have options, right? And basic penciling is basically most of the structure, but not too much of the detail, because there's not really much point. Because then the last step is where I actually ink it in black ink. So that's another layer on top of the pencils on the light table. And the reason some artists will ink right on the pencils. The reason I like to do it this way is it gives you a nice clean sheet, because when you ink over the pencils, sometimes you have, well, most times you have to come back with the eraser and get rid of the pencil, and that tends to smudge sometimes. It tends to take away from the black of the ink as well. So there's things that personally I just avoid by doing that. And then we also have the magic white pen, which is super awesome for mistakes corrections. taking stuff out, and also sometimes using to add in details and textures as well. And that's kind of like the last pass where you kind of do once you've done the inking once, I kind of like ink all my pages, and then once they're all done, come back and kind of edit them a bit, fix them up, clean them up, and then you get it ready for print.
So you mentioned that you do the illustrating first and then the script after that. At what point do you have like the fully fleshed out story that you're going to go for? Do you start with that, like with the like 100% of the story already set in your mind before you get started?
I generally have like a very basic idea, and I work it out in the thumbnails when it's at that small scale. That's where you work out the story and the storytelling and how many pages you need. And like sometimes, it's happened where I've gotten to the end and I'm like, oh, but I missed this story beat. So, I need 2 extra pages, and I'll throw in 2 extra pages and just figure out where to put them in. And again, because it's at the thumbnail level where it's really small and quick and fast to do, you don't waste too much time working that stuff out.
Cool. So, and you mentioned that your stuff is self-published. So I know you have a website, King Comics. That is your publishing company.
Yeah, if you want to call it that, it's just, you come up with a name and make it look important. So yeah, kingcomics.ca is where you can get all that information. And it just came about like when I was getting my cover ready and stuff. I'm like, well, it should have some sort of company name. So, at some point, if everything works out, it'll become an official registered company.
Very cool. Well, it does look like one already. Um, and tell me about Big Baby. So that's the flagship series that you've been working on.
Yeah, we can
Yeah.
show people.
Oh, very
It's
cool.
always nice to have a visual aid. That's the first issue. As an artist, I'm mortified by that cover, but I'm still pretty happy with it overall. But this is like, 2.5 years ago. So
Anyway, they say that if you look back at something you've done in the past and don't cringe, that's a bad sign. So
I think so. I think it's a completely normal. All artists are that way. You would hope that the best thing you've done is what you worked on, yesterday and today.
yeah, absolutely. So tell me about the series. What was the inspiration for it, and what can you tell me about the characters and story without giving too much away for people who
Yeah, I
should
gotcha.
should pick it up?
Yeah, yeah. What's the pitch? Basically, the original idea and why it came about is, as artists, we had grand, lofty ideas. I'd been working on before I started working on Big Baby. I'd couple of years I'd filled up about 3 or 4 like big sketchbooks, tons of ideas and crazy stuff. And I was kind of working on or had this idea for this, sci-fi cosmic epic with like 7 planets and worlds and then I realized it's like, oh my God, like that's a huge undertaking, especially at that time part-time. So I was like, I gotta just, I think, honestly, be practical about this and find a format and a number of pages and something that's going to be fun and that's going to sustain me and that's not going to feel like a chore. So like anything, you start small. So the right away, what determined it was the format that I was going to print it at home. So I figured that out. I just regular legal paper, very practical. And for the actual comic, I was like, 12 pages, short stories, one issue, one story. And I do kind of like serialized comics. So I was like, I'll create a character that's fairly simple to draw, that I like to draw, and that I can draw over and over and not get tired of. Um, you know who Jack Kirby is? He's like a
Yep.
60s, 70s Marvel artist.
Hmm.
When he created this is a little bit of inspiration here, and even if it's not obvious right away, maybe you'll see it. When he created the Silver Surfer, he had said that his idea was to get rid of all the complicated bits of human anatomy. So if you look at the Silver Surfer, he doesn't have eyebrows, he doesn't have pupils, he doesn't have ears, and he doesn't have feet. And like toes, actually, he's got feet, but he doesn't have toes. He's just got like a pointed foot, right?
Hmm.
So some of that kind of worked itself into Big Baby's design. Keep it simple and keep it fun. I like drawing anatomy and like muscles and stuff. Like that's since I was a kid. I was into Arnold Schwarzenegger and He-Man and all that stuff. So I've always liked to draw that stuff. Uh, so that's basically how the actual character came about. Originally, he had no nose. He had a bit of like face paint, and he had like a Hari Krishna knot top. Like that's when I first drew him. That's how it was. And then I was like, yeah, I don't know about some of this stuff, and it just kind of looked a little weird with no nose. So yeah, cut out again the complicated bits, and he's basically what uh he's described as. He should look somewhat like a big baby.
It's pretty interesting. Is it more, does it lean more on like the superhero genre of comics?
Somewhat. I mean, I would say it's a mix of like it's definitely satire and parody, and it's a mix of kind of superhero, maybe aesthetic with maybe more underground autobio comics from like, the 90s. I'm trying to think of Hate, Peter Bagg, just the kind of slice of life comics. Uh, you know, 90s alternative grungy people walking around going to their jobs at the video store and that kind of vibe. So it's a mix of that. It's a mix of basically, probably my life, and some obviously surreal cartoony aspects with Big Baby. Big Baby is basically like my id, right? Like originally I had the byline underneath Tales from the id,
Hmm.
right? And the id is basically that part of you, for those of you who maybe don't know this, that like I guess your more animal kind of needs and wants. Obviously, things that we don't do in polite society or don't say. That would be your id, right? Things you want to say and want to do at work, your frustrations, but that you don't generally. Well, Big Baby is that part of me, I guess, that gets to come out of me and do and say all those things. That
Cool.
would be basically the pitch.
So you mentioned Jack Kirby as one influence. Are there any other big influences in the comic book world that you draw inspiration from?
Well, listen, I mentioned when I was a kid, but I originally kind of got into comics. It was kind of part of the soup of like animation, movies, from that period. When I really seriously got into comics, I think I was about 11. And then it was the age of Image Comics. I don't know if you know anything about Image
Yep.
Comics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What
So,
what what
well,
have they published? Because I know the name, but it's not coming to me right away what they've put out.
oh, well, like a recent kind of successes is like they put out do no Walking Dead would be a good
Oh
example,
yes,
right?
yes,
Of
I've read
something
those.
that's like really hit hard.
Yeah.
But back in the 90s, when I started collecting comics, it was just at the cusp of like Image Comics coming out, and what they basically were like the seven hottest mainstream artists who are on Marvel superhero titles, right? So they were doing Spider-Man and X-Men. There's about six or seven of them, and they just figured out that at that point there was it was a high point in the comics market, and they were selling millions of comics, and they just realized, sorry, cat,
Oh, no problem.
Maud, peux-tu garder le chat avec toi ou s'il te plaît? Sorry about that.
No worries. Animals are
Yes,
welcome on the podcast too. If
yeah, no, I love my cat, but I mean, it's she's still a baby and she's playing with the plastic, and that's gonna mess up your audio for sure.
that's fine.
Yeah. Um. So yeah, Image Comics. So they were the hottest artists of all these titles, selling millions of comics, and they decided to kind of break away from Marvel and start their own independent company. And one of the most famous guys from Image Comics, Todd McFarlane, was drawing Spider-Man selling millions. I've seen an interview where he basically said, I figured out that, to make the same amount of money I was making on Spider-Man selling a million copies, I need to sell 25,000 copies of my independent, nobody character that I just created. But obviously, because they were the seven hottest artists at Marvel, there's a lot of interest. He ended up selling, I think it was 1.8 million copies of that first issue of his independent comic. So he became a millionaire overnight. Now, this is obviously not something that happens very often in comics. It really isn't. It's not that kind of niche. It's more of a niche market, and like rare are these kinds of stories. But yeah, they hit at just the right time, and all those guys, like those are kind of my holy grail comic artists, who I found out later were mostly all of them influenced again by like Jack Kirby and prior artists. But I kind of discovered Jack Kirby through them somehow. So Tom McFarlane, Eric Larson, who did Savage Dragon, and I've always been really into Rob Liefeld. Even though some people say he can't draw, there's things he can't draw. He has wonky anatomy, but there's something exciting about the way he draws. And sometimes we talk about penciling, illustrating, but I like the term kind of cartooning for comic books. I do think it's a medium that allows you to do that. So you should, not that I'm against, realistic art in comics. There's all sorts. That's what's great about comics. But I tend to prefer the slightly kind of exaggerated, cartoony, distorted kind of things you can do in comics.
What's your favorite series, or do you have like a favorite, let's say, graphic novel or comic book series that you always go back to that you've read so many times?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. There's a few. What do I go back to? I mean, I guess because it's like these are the kind of things you discover when you're like, again, 11, 12, 13, and they really hit hard. So, at that time I wasn't really into autobio or indie comics or anything like that. I was reading mostly mainstream stuff. So they would have to be mainstream things, but like Watchmen and Dark
Hmm.
Knight Returns, those are kind of like the perennials that everyone mentions. But Dark Knight specifically was a revelation for. I'll tell you like just a weird little anecdote is I first kind of discovered more about comics and behind the scenes and stuff in this comic magazine called Wizard, which would come out again in and around that Image Comics boom in the 90s. And I remember seeing this one drawing of Batman in this article. I was like, that's horrible. And who drew that? It looks really bad, right? Because I was used to this flashy kind of new artist guys. And then eventually, after a couple of years of hearing about this Dark Knight Returns, back then all you could do was get it mail ordered. So I finally had enough, pocket money to get that done. It took a month or something to arrive. And when I got it, um, I discovered that basically Frank Miller was the artist who had drawn that really ugly Batman. But in the context of the story, once I read it from the beginning to the end, and you get to that part, it opened up my eyes about art, about how sometimes you can do things, make things pretty on purpose, but also make things ugly on purpose, and for story reasons, right? Again, like comic books are a storytelling medium, and you have a narrative to tell, and in that instance it was just a moment where it made sense that Batman was kind of ugly and broken down, and yeah, exactly. If you know a little bit about Dark Knight Returns, like Batman Returns, when he's
Yep,
like,
I've read, I have it, I've read it.
oh, okay, so
Yeah,
there you don't need to, anyone watching, obviously it's basically Batman Returns after a long retirement when he's about, I don't know, 55, 60, something like that. And you know
and
it's pretty awesome.
he takes down Superman.
That's right. That's where that whole trope kind of first came about, right? Yeah.
Yeah, which he used heavily in the Zack Snyder movie. I think it was heavily inspired by that comic.
Yeah, just not to great effect, I guess
No,
is
I
how.
agree. I was not a huge fan of most of
I
the
love
DC.
I think the aesthetic he's got down for that kind of stuff, and yeah, it's he's not putting enough time in the storytelling.
Speaking of, though, I wanted to get your take on kind of the prevalence of comic book, at least the comic book characters in today's pop culture, and how they exploded so much with the Marvel movies and then a bunch of DC movies, and basically anything, even more obscure comics are getting the movie adaptations. Albeit there's a little bit of fatigue now because it's been going for like a decade with all of the MCU stuff and everything. I think people are starting to move away from like the big movie franchises a little bit, but for a period of time, it was like the hottest thing ever. What is it about? Is it the characters? Like, what is it about comics that translates so much and makes for such compelling movies?
I think there's a similar aspect to it if you compare it to something like role-playing games or Dungeons and Dragons, right? It's like, I remember when I first really, again, that period where I really got into comics when I was 11, it was just kind of discovering a new world and new characters and how the world worked. Um, you know, they basically, to me, the Marvel movies brought the concepts from comic books specifically about continuity and things happening and then influencing what's happening in the next movie and characters crossing over. These are all things that have been going on in comics like forever. It's just now they had the means to bring it to the screen, and diehard comics fans definitely responded to it right away because they knew this, and then they've been waiting this for years. And then more mainstream people who don't necessarily read comics got into it as well. And I think they appreciate that aspect of a bigger kind of complete world that you can follow. But maybe just like in the comics, eventually, eh, you know, that kind of runs out, I guess is how I'd put it. You bring it to the extreme and then people kind of fall off, and then you bring it back to basics again. That's usually what happens in comics. And I'm assuming that's what's going to happen with superhero movies as well. They've kind of gone to the brink, with I've seen at least five, blue cosmic holes in the sky in the last few years. Like it's really there's not much more you can kind of squeeze out of it, I think. And I enjoyed them up to what was the last one with Thanos, Infinity
Infinity Game and no, sorry, Infinity War and Avengers Endgame.
Endgame,
Those are the
Avengers
two.
Endgame. So that's the last one I kind of enjoyed. And after that, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it also has to do with, the primo actors um not being there anymore.
Yeah.
There's also this weird aspect of, I didn't come up with this idea or this concept, but I've been hearing about how, there's this whole shift in Hollywood as well towards all these IPs because they can, the Hollywood actor now is not what's selling the movie, it's the characters,
Hmm.
you know? So somehow I'm sure there's a way of minimizing, the actor's control over everything, maybe his pay or things like that in a situation like this, compared to how it was before with like, the actor selling the movie. Now it's the characters, and the actors will become interchangeable.
Yeah,
And with
I
AI, who knows? They'll be
oh my God.
replaceable, right?
So yeah, that's a whole other can of worms that
That's insane.
let's save that because I don't want to get derailed, but I do want to talk
No
about
problem.
AI.
Yeah,
Everybody
yeah,
wants to talk about AI. I do agree to a certain extent, as far as the actors becoming a little bit more interchangeable, especially when we've seen examples of this with Batman, for example. Like how many Batman
yeah,
movies have come out in our lifetime? Now they've become more or less, a little bit more serialized, kind of like the comics, right? Like
yeah,
we've had the Christopher Nolan, Christian Bale Batman movies. We have now the Robert Pattinson Batman. And like previous to that with the Michael Keaton and all the rest of them. With Marvel, however, because they took the long road of building and building to the climax with Endgame, I think people got much more attached to the actors portraying, the characters, Robert Downey Jr.,
sure.
Chris Evans,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Chris Hemsworth, etc. And so two very different approaches. So DC kind of failed in terms of the world building in the very grand scheme of things, but with the Batman movies, at least, each one kind of has its own dedicated fans and tells a very unique story and it puts a unique spin on things, whereas Marvel really took a different approach. So I think for Marvel, on the Marvel side of things, the actors are much more important because of the number of movies that they've been in and people getting attached to them, their portrayal, their take on the characters, because they built it over such a long period of time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, Batman at this point is, so open to interpretation. He's one of those characters and we're used to it now. And even mainstream audiences are used to seeing a different guy in the bat suit that, is it a good or a bad thing? I don't know. On the Marvel side of things is, they're also trying to shift their IPs away from those actors, I assume, because as they move ahead in these trilogies and five parts and stuff, that their salaries also
Yeah.
go up every movie, right? Because they know that it's probably a surefire hit and they really need me. So there's this. It's what's interesting here is that this idea of intellectual property, copyrights, and all these things. Like maybe you've heard about Steamboat Willie, Mickey Mouse, recently on
Yeah.
January 1st, right? Became public domain. There's aspects to a lot of these old characters that will soon be in the public domain, like Batman, like Superman. A few years ago, it's the estate of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. They won a court case against DC. Jerry Siegel, Joe Shuster created Superman
Hmm.
back in 1930, whatever, 38, close enough. Um, and the estate sued DC, and basically what reverted back to them are the rights to that original Superman from 1938, 39. So at that moment, DC had this whole editorial shift where all their comics were called the New 52.
Yeah.
And it was like, everything's starting over after a huge cosmic event, starting back to basics. On the, everything you knew about your character is now different and, more modern and all these things. And Superman all of a sudden didn't have the red trunks, right? Like the red underwear. And that was really because they now no longer had kind of the copyright and trademark to that because of that original
Oh.
Superman now being owned by the estate of their creators. It gets really complicated, right? So, um, what probably happened, because now Superman is back to the red trunks, and there was another cosmic story where they rebooted, and now Superman was Superman again with the red trunks and the classic look. There was probably some sort of settlement between the estate and DC Comics where like now Superman could put his underwear on
That's hilarious. I
again.
didn't even register me that he lost the undies.
It's like a few years ago there was an issue with Steve Ditko, who's claimed to be the co-creator of Spider-Man, um, in his estate. And it's in and around the time that Marvel created the new Spider-Man character Miles Morales.
Mhm.
So at that point, they were kind of like, well, if this turns sour, then our Spider-Man will be Miles Morales, and we just won't publish any kind of Peter Parker Spider-Man. And
Right.
then something worked out where they were, probably again, money was exchanged and they were able to keep publishing Peter Parker Spider-Man.
And now they have an entire Spider Verse that they can pull from.
Oh,
With
that's it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's it seems to be like you said we're going to get into AI, but it seems to be like these corporation stuff are steering things, entertainment industry, anyways, from what I know, steering things towards not needing all these people anymore.
Yeah, which is kind of a shame, and I don't know if that's gonna work out or how well that's gonna work out. Because there's obviously some growing pains with AI, and people sense, like I've heard some people say about, let's say, movies that are released on Netflix or whatever, like this feels like this was made with AI or
Or at
AI
least
assistance.
written by, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because there's something about them that doesn't seem
Seems very
natural.
natural is the word. Yeah, I was gonna say it's like unnatural and very cliched to a point where it's like no one picked up on how horrible this is. Like,
Yeah,
if it was written by, people
and
or a few people.
yeah, obviously there's no way to know for sure, but you just kind of get that feeling. And I've spoken to other people. I spoke to an indie filmmaker who is all excited about AI because it allows him to have assistants that he would normally have to pay people for, and he can do more with less,
I
and
get it.
have a
Yeah.
lot more independence. So it's great in that sense, but it's a slippery slope too, because like how far do you really want to go? And I think that the market will kind of dictate what's acceptable and what isn't, because people will see things that they find to be like not up to par and then reject those things, and then they'll know what needs to be done by a person and what can be done by a computer. And obviously things will improve over time to the point where it's probably going to become indistinguishable. But at least for now, I think there is a threshold where you can tell if something is made by AI or made by a person.
Yeah. I mean, it comes down also to that kind of debate between, art and commercial art. Um, whatever you think of that, you can have lofty ideals about art, but what tends to win out is commercial art because that's where money is.
Yeah.
And everyone's always trying, no matter what your business, you're trying to cut costs and get costs down. So if using AI art somehow does that, I think people are going to do it, unfortunately. And I think it's going to become something where art produced by humans will become kind of a niche thing. But those who are successful at it will probably be, you know millionaires.
One of the other things that it probably does is lower the barrier of entry for a lot of people who aren't skilled artists or haven't put in the years of practice that someone like yourself has, and allows them to participate, and create things more easily. But in my mind, at least, I think that that should elevate the actual artists with who've developed their skills over years and years, and just like rise them to the top of the pile even more so than they are now. That's the way that I interpret it. I'm not sure if that's a accurate reflection of the way the world works, but at least for me, I give much more credit to the people who are doing it themselves, amongst a much larger pool of individuals who are all trying to get into the game.
So you would be one of those people who, like, if you decide to purchase some art for yourself, hang up on the wall at home or whatever, then you would go that route.
Mhm.
I'm just not sure that most people would. That's, kind of where I'm coming at it from. I'm just trying to be realistic about it. It's not going away. You know
No.
what I mean? Like that's, it's like when the internet showed up or mechanization back in the day, or you know what I mean? Like it hasn't gone away. All those things have not gone away. So, I don't know how to, the thing, the thorny, we're talking about rights and copyrights and things like that. Most of that AI is, mining specific artists, right? You can write, eh, I don't know, Tarzan in the style of Pablo Picasso. You know what I mean? And it'll, pop out that way. Well, should the estate of Pablo Picasso get a cut of that if you're making prints and selling it? And that's where it becomes a thorny issue, right? Where's
Yeah.
the AI getting this information from? They're getting it from real artists, right?
Yeah, I guess that's something that's to be determined and will iron itself out over time, but it's definitely a question right now. How would somebody like yourself use AI, or if at all, to help facilitate your process or make things easier for you? Are there any ways that you could imagine it being useful?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Um, just I was talking before about thumbnails and layouts and composition. While I wouldn't want to, copy a specific image or style, or we call that in the art world a swipe. Um, it could suggest compositions. You know what I mean? Like I could throw in again, well, Tarzan in the Amazonian jungle, crocodiles in the water.
Hmm.
And I could come up with obviously a few different quick sketches of different compositions and different angles to view it from. But maybe the AI does it real quick and gives me 15 options. And then I just go through them and go, okay, that's a good composition, right? And again, I'm only taking the composition. I personally am not someone who, I mean, this is a thorny subject in comic books. So it's like some people swipe. I get it. I don't want to do it myself, but I'm not specifically against it because it is a long tradition in comic books.
Is that
Some,
well, so like what elaborate on the swiping aspect? Is
oh
that
shit,
just like
yeah, absolutely.
copying what someone else has done? Is that what it boils down to?
Basically, yeah, yeah. You would, maybe it's a hard angle to draw a certain character, so you flip through a bunch of your old comics, and you're like, oh, this is cool. And even sometimes, like you take the pose, but you change the character. It could be a male pose that you draw a female character in. But if it's not pointed out somehow, or there's little tricks you can do because sometimes artists will just write in after this guy. So it's the fine line between an homage and a swipe. The
Okay,
homage is acknowledged, right? So it's like I've done it where I use the composition from a classic cover, and then I've done it with Jack Kirby. So I think I got it here. I wrote underneath so I could show you. And this is like a I'll show the cover.
cool.
And this is a double homage because I originally saw this drawn by 90s artist Dale Keown, who I found out later because he hadn't mentioned it in the image, but that he actually did it after Kirby, which is kind of like the original issue 1 cover of the Hulk from the
Oh,
60s.
nice. Oh yeah, it is
Uh,
reminiscent of the Hulk.
as well, he's a big muscular character, right? So yeah, yeah, yeah. It made sense.
Awesome. Where is the comic book industry at today? We kind of talked about movies and other forms of media. There's obviously been a big shift to digital and away from physical, but comics is firmly rooted in physical pages, right? I know there's web comics and you can get them digitally too. Just doesn't have the same appeal, and I feel like a lot of the comic book fans appreciate that and agree with that. So how has the industry changed over the years and where is it at today?
Well, listen, we have to acknowledge also that it's a global thing, right? So we can talk about the American comic book market. Generally, we talk about European comic market and Japanese because the Japanese market is insanely huge and it's much more embedded and enmeshed in their culture. So people of all ages read comics in Japan. It's just a very normal thing. And for some reason, that seems to be what's taking over here in America. American comic sales, like mainstream stuff, is at its lowest point. It's been in I don't know how long, and I'm not. Everyone's predicted the end of the comic book industry in the States. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. But 90% of sales in North America are manga. So that's where it is right now. It's Japan's killing it, basically.
Oh wow, that's interesting. I myself have recently started collecting the One Punch Man manga series, so that's
I've
one
started
that
I've started Berserk, so
cool. But I mean, I do have a love for the American stuff too, and particularly the big Marvel and DC superheroes. And like one of the intimidating things for me has always been like, at what point do I get in? Because you mentioned that they do these grand story arcs and then they reset everything. There's these cosmic events. Now there's like multiverse happening, and
too much.
like
Yeah.
it is too much, and it's become like when I was a teenager, for example. I think that's more or less when the DC New 52 series started. I was probably like in my late teens or something like that. And that's when I kind of wanted to get in. And I was like, oh, well, they rebooted for all of these different characters. So, like, well, which one do I want to read about? So, which series do I start? And then, even those became increasingly complex over time. And it's very hard to follow. So, like, what do you recommend as a starting point for somebody who's interested in comics but intimidated by just the volume of stuff out there?
Sure. Um, Listen, if we're talking specifically about like superhero comics, I would recommend, if you're into Batman and Superman and Spider-Man, you buy what are called like the perennials, right? Like even, Dark Knight Returns, if you're into Batman, you're going to enjoy that for sure. If we're talking about current stuff that's coming out, I mean, DC's been doing more of this, but I think Marvel's kind of coming along as well. Well, where like instead of following the regular series, like you said, that has like long storylines and crosses over with this other comic that I don't necessarily want to read or buy, and then this event comic comes out and it's all connected, and it gets to be a lot, and you're buying a lot of stuff that you don't want, basically. Um, they offer up stuff like recently I've gotten last year I got a Batman miniseries by Mark Silvestri, right? Out of continuity of the regular, it's just Mark Silvestri, an artist I really like, doing what he thinks is his coolest Batman story in art, right? And it's a 4 issue miniseries, and after that, you're done.
Oh,
You know what I
cool.
mean? So stuff like that is what I go for when it comes to mainstream comics. Now I don't buy a lot, and more recently, there's this artist. I'm not sure exactly. He's from South America. His name is Rafael Grampa, and he's doing a Batman miniseries kind of in that same vein where it's like his own take, one miniseries, 4 issues, and then you're out. There's a great one from the 2000s as well by Paul Pope, who's this other kind of more indie book artist who did a super awesome Batman series. I think it's called Batman Year 100. It's awesome. It's super cool. And again, four, thick issues, and then you're out.
I think I picked up one of those a few years ago. Well, the individual issues, a series called The Death of Wolverine, which is, I think, four
Sure.
or
Yeah.
five issues. I really, really like that one. I don't have a lot of individual issues. I tend to collect more like the compilations, the volumes, or the graphic novels.
That's the best bet. Yeah, either something that was produced by an artist that you like, whether it's a miniseries or a graphic novel, a finite story. Um, I go with the artists and creators that I like, and most times I'm not disappointed. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I'm disappointed when I start off with an artist I like, and then he leaves the comic, and then some artists I don't like as much as drawing it, and then like we talked about crossover issues and all this auxiliary stuff that I don't want. So I mostly buy, honestly, these days is more indie uh, and independent, like Kickstarter, Patreon kind of projects,
Mhm.
stuff like that. I know the creators or I've seen them on Facebook, and I take a chance on sometimes something that looks kind of crazy or wonky. I do tend to like stuff now that's more out of left field, so that's kind of what I go for.
Cool. So I know that you wrapped up volume one of Big Baby. It has 13 issues. And what's next? What are you going to work on after this?
Eventually I want to get back to Big Baby. Like originally my goal at the very beginning was to like I want to do at least see if I can do at least 12 issues, right? I got to that. I even was able. I had to do 13 issues because
Mhm.
I didn't have enough room for the story, and that's how I ended up doing that. And I'm super glad I did because then, I went past even what my original goal was. I also did a one shot this summer. That's another character completely, Star Crasher. Here's the back cover.
Cool.
This is like cosmic kind of surreal sci-fi. It's a finite, just one 32-page story. That was another goal was to, it's the longest comic I created or story narrative I created up to that point. And then Big Baby 13 is 34. So I busted that because I needed those 2 extra pages I was mentioning.
Hmm.
um, and so Big Baby Volume 2 is somewhere in the future, at least a year away. So this year, the plan is basically to do a 4 issue miniseries. This time, I'd like to do full color um, and get it printed professionally. Uh, the basic concept is kind of a satire and parody of current media figures, both on cable news and on the internet. So definitely, like I'm thinking, basically the title is I've changed the names for obviously legal purposes, but you probably know who I'm referring to. The comic for now, I'm pretty sure this is the title. It's going to be Bro Jogan and the All Right.
Okay. Yep.
So
Get
I'm
that reference crystal clear.
excellent. So just you probably see where that's going. But I'm aiming to poke fun at both. Figures on the left, on the right. Again, not that I necessarily personally think that Joe Rogan is on the right, but he's been accused of that,
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
if maybe that's a bad thing. But um, so other characters in there, as part of the All Right, they're kind of like the that world's, I guess superhero team, Avengers. They work out of the comedy mothership in Austin. Um, there's Peter Jordanson is in there. Yulon Mesk, and who's the other guy? Russell Rand.
A
Yeah,
whole
so
a great cast of characters, I must say.
they're all very fun to draw. To be honest, like they all have something. Like there are people who are they just lend themselves to a drawing. No offense, and because it's not a good or bad thing, but like you'd be harder to draw. You know what I mean? But for some reason, like Russell Brand, he's got the hair and the beads, and like it just you know he's gonna be having the Doctor Strange hands, and like what I mean. He's the mystic,
Yeah, very cartoony already in his
right?
demeanor.
Like, yeah. It pretty much like the when I got the idea, I was like, man, this is almost like too easy in a way.
Oh, I can't wait to see the depictions of the because I can imagine it in my mind already, but I'm excited to see your take on them.
And then yeah, I got like I have a few villains. I don't want to reveal the big one at the end, but I'm thinking of I haven't changed his name yet, so I don't mind say. I mean, it's okay if I just say it here. Brian Setzer, is that his name? The
Seltzer?
CNN
Yeah.
Seltzer. Yeah, maybe his name will be Seltzer in you know what I mean. This is how I get away with it. Alex Jones is definitely going to be. I'm already planning him for issue 3, so yeah. It should be fun.
Fantastic. Looking forward to that. Where can people get your stuff if they want to pick something up?
The best bet, just to kind of check it out, is again kingcomics.ca. Other than that, you can contact me on Facebook, either through my name, Max Rex, or the actual Big Baby page, and Big is with 2 G's. Instagram as well, so Maximus Rex 13 on Instagram. Anywhere you kind of just private message me. It's a very small operation, so I do mail order
Cool.
basically.
Oh, so you'll send out the physical issues. Are you compiling all 13 issues of Big Baby into one package? Is that
I've definitely thought about it. It's to be seen if whether I put it out this year for some event that I'm at, or I had thought about maybe when Volume 2 eventually comes out that they kind of make it happen at the same time.
mhm.
Yeah, but I do have tons of individual issues available, and I am doing a 20% rebate on the whole set if anyone's crazy enough to buy that.
Excellent. Well, I encourage everybody to check that out, and I'll have all the links to your stuff down in the description of the video, so people can go and check it out for themselves, and maybe buy some t-shirts, buy some merch, support a local artist and a good person who's very passionate about what he's doing. So I hope everybody will go check that out.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Great. Max, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed this conversation and good luck with whatever 2024 brings you. I hope lots of success in your comic career and a lot of creativity as well.
Thank you, man. All the same, right back to you, man. Hope the band is doing well, and can't wait to hear some new music.
Awesome. Yep. Well, doing our best to get something new out this year.
Cool, man. Can't wait to hear it.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks a lot.
All right, man. Thank you.